All right.
There we go.
Try to stumble through an intro and then we'll get right into it.
Okay.
All right. And I usually
Yep.
target about 45 minutes at least, up to an hour and a half, however it plays out. But
Okay.
I'll record as long as you have something to say. All
Okay.
right.
Good enough.
Welcome back to Between the Levees. I am joined today by Mr. Mark Veum, a steam engineer that spent a fair amount of his life working on the American Queen and with a few of our previous guests. Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, tell me first, where you first ran into Bert Suarez, Allison Bailey, and Frank Rivera.
Well, Frank, he came over to the Queen. Oh, I'm trying to remember the exact year. I don't think maybe it was 2015, 2016. I guess he was a watchman first, and then he eventually became a Riverlorian. So I got to know Frank pretty good. He'd take, tour groups down into the engine room and I'd answer their questions, or if he had a question about something engineering related about the boat, I was more than happy to entertain his questions. Bert, I known him, pretty much almost the entire time I've been with the Queen. He was pilot, and then that last season I was on the Queen, I believe he was master. So, and then of course I knew Allison, from 2014 to well, she went to the push boats. When did she go to the push boats?
I'm not sure of the year, but it's only been, I think, a couple of years.
Yeah, but she was made over there when I first came over there as an engineer, and so we had a pretty good working relationship. In terms of I've you know we worked together to kind of see to it that repairs for the navigation side of things got done, and vice versa. If I needed their assistance, back in the paddle wheel for something, she'd be more than happy to supply people for that. And we have many a conversation on the sun deck late at night. I'd be sitting up there, just kind of looking out at the bluffs going by, and just sit down. We just kind of be talking about boat life and what's been going on, and she had kind of an uncanny way. I was whenever we had some mechanical issues, I didn't have to spell it out for her. She just she kind of tell from how I was phrasing things is what was going on. And so yeah, she was a good person to work with. They all were. So
Any good stories come to mind of any antics or humorous events going on between the four of you?
well, maybe not so much the four of us. I mean, most of the antics I was involved with was strictly in the engineering department. There's always something we're up to doing, whether it be a practical joke of some kind or just stuff like that. Um, you know, Bert, he had a pretty good sense of humor, so every now and then we just kind of share a good joke or two. Or I remember one time where we were having a generator problem, and so air conditioning was off, and he's down in the engine room with us, and we're just kind of sitting there having some water late in the night, and I kind of shoot this expression, like a why me expression, and he laughed at that. That kind of became a running joke for us. If I shot him the look, he said, "Just start laughing." But we had a good camaraderie, and I think that showed, across the departments and across pretty much a lot of the veteran crew.
Well, I admittedly know little to nothing about steam engines. So before we get into your story, fill me in on, I guess, the operation of a steam engine, what it takes to maintain, I guess how costly that is. Were you carrying coal on board, and how much?
We carried diesel fuel. That was our primary fuel. I mean, a lot of the old steamers would have burned number six. And there's still one or two under the American flag, especially up on the Great Lakes, burn coal. But the Queen, she burned diesel fuel. So it's a four-step process where you generate the steam in the boiler, then you pipe it back to the engine room, and it would expand into the engines as a tandem compound engine. So it expanded twice. You had a high pressure expansion and you had a low pressure expansion. So it moved the rod back and forth like this. And then once the steam was done doing its work, because we're a condensing plant, it would go down to a main condenser and then go through a series of tanks, filter apparati, and eventually be sent back to the fire room again and made back into a steam again. It's a very tight system. I only had to add maybe 1,500 gallons a day to the system just to maintain, the proper amount of water. Fuel, you know, you know, one of the main reasons we did the diesel fuel was, we had three diesel generators on board. It just made sense to have one fuel versus two fuels. Been on some boats where we've had two fuels or something like that, and you could kind of get things mixed up if you didn't know what you were doing.
How extensive and I guess labor intensive is it to maintain the steam systems?
Well, I mean, there's stuff we did every day, every week, every month. I kind of had a maintenance engineering log where I kind of keep track of, when what day I did what and vice versa. So like daily, it would be just kind of looking out for loose gear, checking out for, loose nuts and bolts, just making sure that the lubrication systems for the steam engine were working properly. Check the paddle wheel and make sure there was no loose spreader bars and no loose boards. I mean, you still get a bar that might break off underway, but 99% of the time we could catch them there at the landing before we started to roll. Weekly there was a whole bunch of tasks, out of the strainers, some more lubrications, various components in the system, and we had to lubricate all the running gear in the overhead, that actuate all the valves. And if we didn't do that, once a week, that could pose problems, broken pins, squeals, squeaks, or engine failure. And then, of course, monthly, there was inventories that had to be done to keep track of how much oil was on board in the engine room, how much fuel, and submit a request for additional filters or oil as needed. Then, of course, the build system, I'd be doing some work on the build system, making sure all the valves worked, stuff like that.
Well, what was your normal work day, and how long were you riding usually?
Normal work day was 12 hours. The majority of the time I was on the boat, I was on the noon to midnight. So I'd start work, I don't know, 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, then wrap up around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And in terms of the rotation, now initially it was a 28 rotation where I was on for 28 days, not for 28 days. But that wasn't always the case. Especially if we were short engineers, I might end up being on there. I had one year where I was on for about 4.5 months straight. Needless to say, I was very glad to get off the boat. And it worked out good because I had gotten off of Red Wing, Minnesota. So I was only 55 miles from home, didn't have to worry about flying or anything. This is, well, be home in an hour and taking a much needed rest. But the 28 was more or less an anomaly in the industry than a normal aspect. I got friends who are out for 3 months at a time, 4 months at a time. And I have some that are like relief out of a union hall, so they'll hop on a boat for 45 days, hop home, and within like 2 or 3 days, gets called to go to another boat. So sometimes he had a lot of vacation, sometimes he didn't. So, but in terms of the Queen, that's generally what my rotation was and time.
Well, sadly, I never did have an opportunity to get on the Queen myself. If I were to step foot on it back in the day, whenever as a first timer, and happened to somehow meet you on the boat, how would you introduce me to that vessel? I guess it should tell me about its history, its inner workings, and all that.
Well, I mean, go for the basic history first. I mean, its importance and river history. It was pretty much the last of its kind ever built. I'd give kind of the basic specifics of how large it is, and kind of put things into perspective. She was 418 feet long, about 90 feet wide, and she's 13 and a half feet deep. And the paddle wheel was about the size of about 28 feet by about 30 feet. And the analogy or the comparison I would use for the paddle wheel, because so many of my friends, lived in post-war uh, post-World War II houses, small, excuse me, um, starter homes. So I say, imagine one of those homes being back in the paddle wheel pit, being spun end over end 15 times a minute. That's how big the paddle wheel is. Of course, people were always boggled about how much wood was in the boat. We had 288 pieces of lumber back in the paddle wheel itself. So the steel. So I kind of go into the basics on that, and then I'd explain how the plant worked. I explained that that we had two separate plants running the boat. Explain a little bit, kind of give a comparison, like in terms of generating capacity. We had 3 generators, all of them are line. It'd be enough to light up a small town. So stuff like that would be the first matters, and I explained a little bit about crew life, and just what a typical day for a crew member was. The question came up, and it was kind of funny. In the engine room, one of the most commonly asked questions, at least from the passenger point of view, to me, was what happens when you flush the commode? I was guaranteed to have at least one person a day ask that question. And I'm just kind of like, it's kind of an odd question, isn't it? But I've had some really weird questions over the years. I had one lady that actually asked me what the cubic feet per minute of water flow was the paddle wheel. Instantly enough, I was able to figure it out fairly quickly. I don't have the number in front of me, but I guess she was trying to play stump the engineer, and well, there was always 1 or 2 passengers on each trip that would try to do that. So far, I was undefeated, so guess I must know what I'm doing. But I kind of explained a little bit about the steering controls, explain a little bit how the engine or telegraph worked. And I've had people ask about the sound powered phones, explain how that worked. Especially like with new crew, a lot of the younger guys had never seen a sound powered phone before, so I had to kind of use that. Um, just tell them it was like a tin can telephone. You just kind of that's what you do. So that kind of gives you a general idea.
And was the Queen the only vessel you worked on out there?
No, I did some time on the American Empress out on the Columbia. Filled in out there for a little bit, and then back when Majestic had the boat, I did fill in over on the Delta Queen a little bit occasionally, and that was a whole different animal. So she had a little bit different style of engine. She was a very old vessel, a lot of woodwork, really beautiful boat. I guess she's still sitting somewhere down in Homa. But yeah, in terms of the river craft, that was pretty much the 3 river craft I worked on. Everything else was, freighters or OSVs or container ships and stuff like that.
Yeah, we'll definitely want to touch on all that stuff before we wrap up here. But I've not had too many guests on here that have been on the Columbia River. Tell me about that experience.
It was really a beautiful run. I mean, it's just it's just amazing how much the climate changes, how much the scenery changes in the space of you know uh, going the length of the state of Washington. You start on Astoria right there on the ocean. You go through the Cascades, go past Portland. The Cascades are beautiful, especially going past Mount Hood. And you see people with these like paragliders where they just kind of glide through the air. It's kind of neat to watch them kind of bounce around the water. And then once you got past the Cascades, over by the Dells, suddenly things start turning very arid, kind of like I won't say a full-blown desert, but it was very dry. And then by the time you reach Clarkston, you were pretty much in a desert. You see all kinds of weird plants you've never seen before, and like, what is that? I think that's a cactus. So it was just very beautiful. And the boat, like the Queen, was very, very well appointed. Both the Empress and the Queen really gave you a sense of place. I mean, there was a lot of Northwest art on board, Native American art. There was some, Russian art because like some like Fabergé eggs and things like that. So some lacquer work. So it was just a very beautiful, and I always made a point when I was out there to look at something different in these towns each time we were out there. So like in a story, I'd go hunt down the Goonie stuff or do the column on top of the hill. Portland had some historical stuff. I'd go across in the town and kind of look around in there and try to find a museum or something to go check out. Stevenson, there wasn't so much in that town, but if you wanted to go for a nice nature walk, there was some really nice trails you could take. So it was just a very beautiful run.
Tell me about the first time you stepped on the Queen and the last time you stepped off.
First time I stepped on the Queen, oh, that was in '06. This happened to be during a Coast Guard inspection. So no sooner I'd walked on board in the black ship. So I'm thinking, okay, this is maybe not the best way to start on a boat. So we had all kinds of stuff. The chief was running around, everybody's running around. It was just chaos. And I took the job on the Queen, more or less out of curiosity. I never expected I'd be on her as long as I was. I said, well, I've never been on the rivers before. Let's go check that out. And it turned out that it grew on me over the years. My last day was actually on my 50th birthday. So I kind of went out in style. They stepped off the boat and uh, they let me take her into the wharf one last time. So I ran the engines coming in, answered the telegraph, and rang up finished with engines, and it was kind of bittersweet, as I knew I would the last time I rang up finished with engines. So, but it was a very interesting trip from day one to the last day. Really,
And
I mean,
has it been announced officially her fate?
well, there's still some scuttlebutt going back and forth, but you know, some allude to the fact that she'll be scrapped. She is about 30 years old now, and there was some talk about having one of those river communities, take her on as like a floating hotel or a museum of some kind, like what they did for the Delta Queen for a while in the Chattanooga. There's enough scuttlebutt out there where it sounds more and more likely like she's getting back. There was some talk about maybe having one of her, river communities, have a museum, hotel, but there are very few ports that could take a boat that size. So I think her sailing days are done. So it's unfortunate,
Right.
but the amount of money, the upkeep, it takes a lot of money to keep the Queen running. I mean, it's not just fuel, it's not just there's air conditioning, there's safety features that have to be continuously updated. Uh, Elevators, they always have to work on elevators and stuff like that. It just the cost just adds up. So that's kind of how I see it.
Well, let's backtrack now to your story, please, sir. You're coming to us from St. Paul, Minnesota this morning. Were
Yes.
you born in Minnesota?
Yes, I was actually born in St. Paul.
Okay.
This is stone's throw. This is stone's throw from the river. So I grew up along the banks of the river, and I lived in kind of a quiet middle class neighborhood. Folks. My mom was a nurse, and my dad worked for the state of Minnesota. So it was really a nice childhood. I
Well,
had to go ahead.
what led you eventually to the career you found yourself in?
Yeah, I just kind of stumbled into it, to be quite frank. I was living up in Duluth in the early '90s, and this happened to see the boats going in and out of the harbor up there, and said, well, maybe I want to go check out and see where these things go. So I applied to the Union Hall and got on my way on a boat and turned out I liked it so well I kept sailing. It's not for everybody, but for certain people, it's just I don't know if it's maybe because you're kind of I won't say wanderlust, but I want to go see the world, I go see what's beyond the horizon and get a chance to meet different people and really turned out well. So started up at the Great Lakes and then did some time on the Indians when the ship was running and did a little time in the Gulf. That was a whole different ball game down there, that's for sure. And rivers, a lot of boats.
Well, yeah, fill me in, I guess, on your career out there on all those waterways, aside from the Queen.
Mhm. Well, I mean, the Great Lakes was kind of a neat place to sail. You had all four seasons. You're dealing with getting stuck in ice sometimes. Sometimes you were going through a real bad gale. So you saw some beautiful places, beautiful islands, little tucked away coves. Um, some of the bigger cities, and even some of the old Rust Belt cities had their unique quirks to them. But you were carrying taconite, you were carrying coal, you were carrying stone, all the stuff's needed to build roads, run power plants, build buildings and things like that. And so you had a chance to really learn how these industries all, and different docks for different, cargoes. And some of the docks were a little bit more interesting, like the chute docks in Duluth. You had to kind of watch your step because these iron marbles, in your head walking down the catwalk. Stone dock, but you see big old pits of they're open mines. So I mean, it would be just these massive pits going on for maybe a couple miles, and they're just scooping stone out, and it's just amazing. Did the St. Lawrence Seaway a couple times. Did the Welland. So had a chance to see all five Great Lakes and pretty much take the Seaway all the way out to the ocean. That was kind of neat. In terms of the oceans, most of my time that I did do on the oceans on the Pacific, it's just, on pa operation, like a two-boat fleet or something, old rust bucket, pick up containers or some cargo, take it across to, I don't know, like Japan or the Philippines or something like that. So that was kind of neat. Had a chance to see some different cultures and see how different people lived and try some different foods. Some of them I wouldn't recommend. Uh, And then, of course, the Gulf, we were out there servicing the rigs and, you know, uh, those supply boats were pretty much a floating one-stop shop because it carried rig water, it carried fuel, it carried the cement for the wells, it carried all the drill pipe. So and as engineer, not only were we running the engines, but sometimes you would have to go up on deck and help the riggers, or you sometimes have to be a deckhand. So it'd be like 2 o'clock in the morning and you get the engine started and captain would call down, throw on your work vest. You gotta throw off. Okay, just hold her at the wharf long enough for me to get back on board. Okay. But some of the cargoes were kind of dangerous. On 2 occasions, we carried methanol, so we were essentially a floating gas can. Yeah, yeah, that methanol was just some dangerous stuff. And I remember being down in the pump flat while the stuff was being pumped, and I'm standing next to these pumps with this highly volatile fluid and thinking, let's just get this stuff off the boat and get the heck out of here. And yeah, we were real glad to get that stuff off. So yeah, it's been very rewarding.
Were you always drawn to tinkering with engines and mechanical things? And did you have any formal education or training prior to showing up in the industry?
Well, I always kind of had a mechanical inclination. Um, that originally when I started in the industry in the early 1990s, I intended to go on the navigation side of things, but it just I ended up my sons ended up putting me in the navigation side, and that's um ended up side. In terms of, I did some, classes at Great Lakes Maritime Academy. That's how I got some of the book smarts on the engineering side of things. And when I haven't been sailing, I would take college courses like over here at the Metropolitan State University in St. Paul, my bachelor's degree. So you're able to kind of fit in education with your career at the same time. It's just it yeah, it kind of had to juggle a few things, but it turned out good. So yeah, I mean, just when I was growing up as a kid, I spent a lot of times in the summer with my grandfather up in the North Woods, and he was kind of a tinkerer too. And many an afternoon, we'd just be going through all the junk in his garage and seeing what we could concoct. Some of the stuff was kind of interesting. I don't think my grandma liked it too well. So some of it, and it ran in the family too. I had a uncle, he's passed now, but he was a chief safety nuclear engineer for the two nuclear power plants here in Minnesota. He started his training and his career on the USS Nautilus back in the days when Rickover was still running the show. So that's kind of neat. And then my other uncle, he just passed not too long ago. He wasn't as mechanically inclined, but he was good with electronics and stuff. He was a radio man, and so I kind of inherited some of that stuff too.
What did
So,
your father do for this? What did your father do for the state?
yeah, he worked for the Department of Employee Relations at the state of Minnesota. Yeah, he was there for a long time, over 30 years. Uh, he started that job not too long after he had gotten out of Vietnam, and so it's like the HR department for the state of Minnesota. So it pretty much handled policies, job classifications, union matters, everything that a small company HR would be doing, except on a larger scale. And then my mother, she was a RN. She started her nursing in the early 60s. She retired in '08, and she had passed in 2010. But so she had a long run. Uh, Not too long ago, I was hospitalized at this the hospital she retired from. So in a way, I kind of felt she was there. That's what my parents did.
Well, finally here, I know, of course, you've written a few books, one of which I acquired recently. Tell me about, I guess, the process writing those books, what each of them were about, and yeah, I guess how that part of your life's been going.
Well, the two that actually are under my name and not under an alias, um, I just kind of did them as a whim. Yeah, just decide, well, let's write a book and see what happens. So, Season of the Witch, that's the one about the Great Lakes. It was kind of a dry run, just so the writing style, I still hadn't quite developed my writing style, so it's still kind of choppy in spots. But I wanted to write about something I knew, and I knew the Great Lakes really well. I knew about sailing and stuff, and it just seemed natural. Interestingly enough, I just started writing and started pounding the keys, and it just kept coming out of the mind. I didn't really have to give much thinking to it at all. But the story was just there, and it started kind of getting it all together. And I kind of a book of poetry. It was kind of my first real try at poetry. I was involved with a woman at the time that was a good inspiration for poetry, and so a lot of it was inspired by her. And I've been doing some small pieces under aliases, articles, and things like that. You don't make a lot of money off of it, but you do it more or less as a challenge. So I think maybe that's the main reason I did the writings. Is it was a new challenge. It was something different. Just wanted to see if I could do it.
Now, Season of the Witch, I know, of course, it's about I believe, a shipwreck.
Right.
Was it all focused on one incident?
Not it kind of loosely draws upon multiple different wrecks and it's kind of hybrided together. So there are some aspects to it that may seem hauntingly similar to say there are some aspects of the tragedy that maybe might seem more like the morale that sank in '66. So it kind of draws those wrecks. And then it also brings maybe to light what a mariner's life is like for both the people who live with them on shore as well as what their lives are like on a boat. And some of the conversations that go on, some of the dialogue, it's it's really kind of a hodgepodge. It kind of tries to give an overall feel for what something like that's like.
Well, to wrap this up this morning, sir, tell me, I guess, your favorite part of your career, your life out there on the water, and your least favorite.
Uh, well, I think my favorite was just being on the Queen for all those years because no two trips were exactly alike. The sunsets and the sunrises were beautiful, starry nights, uh, um, going through the bluffs, going up the Tennessee River, for example, shooting through the gorge. Man, that run through the gorge was just wonderful. Least favorite, I could think of a few. I wasn't a big fan of getting stuck in the ice. I used to get stuck in the ice all the time, and sometimes you'd be sitting there for 2 or 3 days, and you hear the icebreaker go by and sound like rocks. And you just kind of wondering if you ever got ice. Been through a couple of real bad storms. Those were a lot of fun, especially on old boats. It creaked, and you hear rivets shooting off, and stuff like that. Well, even the Queen has challenging days too. I was on watch when the paddle wheel shaft broke back in 14, and that was this one night from hell. I mean, the wheel shaft broke, just smoking. It was making a heck of a racket. Then we had to take the whole darn thing apart by the time we got to Pittsburgh. It's one big 288 piece jigsaw puzzle. Stuff like that. I mean, really, also the heat. I mean, some of those days, especially in the boiler room, you'd get to 125 degrees, maybe even 130. So that was maybe one thing that I didn't exactly like, but it goes with the territory.
Are there any waterways out there you've not run that you'd like to have?
I think I've covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover. I mean, there's some maybe over in, Europe or maybe down South America that might be interesting to visit and just look at. Other than that, I pretty much covered everything I wanted to.
Glad to hear
So,
it, sir. And what are you doing with yourself these
yeah.
days?
Well, I've been kind of doing some additional writing on the side, been doing some odd jobs here and there, and these days and times, it's just I pretty much I'm semi-retired now, so I just kind of do gigs, little jobs here and there, and it works out all right. Pays the bills. So, you reach that point in my 50s now where it's getting kind of harder to, go across catwalks and climb through this and climb through that. And, some of these spaces, especially stationary plants, used to have a lot of room.
Well, sir,
So
I think that'll do it, bud. I appreciate your time here this morning. We'll keep in touch with you.
yeah. Hopefully, I was able to answer the questions, give you some perspective. So,
Did you have anything else to share before we call this one?
nope, nope, nope. I just it's kind of fun just thinking about everybody on the Queen and knowing that some are involved. So, with these podcasts and stuff. So it's
Yes,
good to see
sir.
them active as well.
Thanks again, bud.
All right. All right. All right. Well, you have a good rest of your morning and afternoon.
You too, bud. Thanks. This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.